in the war.
What is up, everybody? Jeremy Eisenfire here, and welcome to the channel. 28 years later is officially here, and one thing's for sure, the film has generated quite a lot of discussion ever since its release, both good and bad, and is undoubtedly one of the most polarizing horror films to hit theaters in recent memory. And with the highly controversial ending, one must wonder what exactly are we going to get in the next installment, as we have not one but three new 28 years later films to look forward to, with the next one being titled The Bone Temple, set to hit theaters in January. 28 years later certainly had a very unusual ending, as we got introduced to a very controversial figure named Jimmy, a character that is set to be one of the main antagonists of the next film, played by Jack O'Connell. And with his highly controversial appearance being modeled after Jimmy Savile, the character has certainly garnered a lot of discussion ever since the film's release. And to top things off, we also got confirmation directly from Danny Boyle himself that Cillian Murphy will be returning for the franchise in the next film. Begging the question, just what exactly will the second film be about, and how exactly will Jim be brought into the narrative? We've also heard from Danny Boyle that the Jimmy that we meet at the end of the film is going to dominate a good portion of the second installment. And if the original Jim from 28 Days Later, played by Cillian Murphy, is also set to make a return in that same film, could we potentially see these two characters in opposition to one another, or as I like to call it, the Battle of the Jimmies? Could we potentially see a Jim versus Jimmy showdown in the Bone Temple, with young Spike being caught in the middle and being forced to choose a side? And if so, just what exactly is that going to mean for characters like Jamie and Dr. Kelson? Ever since the announcement that Cillian Murphy will be returning after 28 years, fans have been very excited to see Jim again, as I have as well. After all, many of us want to know what exactly happened to him after 28 Days Later. What happened to Selena? What happened to Hannah? Did they all live happily ever after? Or was their rescue at the end of the first film only the beginning of their troubles? And as excited as I am to see Cillian Murphy again on screen, I am left to wonder just how exactly are they going to bring him back into the story in a way that actually makes sense. And why is Jim still in the quarantine zone at all, for that matter? I think one potential reason that Jim could show back up inside the quarantine zone after 28 years that could make sense is if he is some way attached to NATO. Could Jim potentially have been recruited by NATO after being rescued, seeing that he could potentially be an asset? After all, if nothing else, Jim has proved himself to be very capable during the events of 28 Days Later, nearly taking out a whole battalion single-handedly to rescue Selena and Hannah. And seeing as this was back during the earliest days of the infection, could NATO have potentially been recruiting survivors that they think could be of use to them? And if Jim was recruited by NATO all those years ago, it could uniquely set him up to be brought back into the storyline in a way that would make perfect sense, especially when you consider the role that NATO might be playing in this new trilogy. Upon the release of the second trailer for 28 Years Later, we got a hidden message buried within, a cleverly hidden box cipher that translates to Memento Mori, which just so happens to be the password for a website called The Rage Leaks, which give us a much deeper insight as to what NATO might really be up to. When taking a look at the Rage Leaks, we see multiple different files attached, all of which that give us a deeper context as to the surroundings of the film.
Mayday, mayday. This is Erik Sundqvist from the Öresund. We hit something. Boat started taking on water. The boat is, gone. 8 men on a life raft. Could have been more, but nobody wanted to leave without being heavily armed, in case we need to land on shore.
Which include a very interesting correspondence between two people that appear to be working for NATO. A correspondence that suggests that NATO might actually be lying to the rest of the world about what is really happening inside the quarantine. And based on the context of the correspondence, it appears that these two NATO employees seem to be trying to get the truth out to the real world, which, in my opinion, offers a perfect explanation for bringing Jim back into the narrative after 28 years, with him being one of the NATO employees trying to get the truth out to the real world. After all, we have seen the kind of character that Jim does possess in 28 Days Later. Towards the ending of the film, he has a chance to escape and get away scot-free, but chooses to come back and risk his life in order to save Selena and Hannah. And I imagine someone with Jim's moral compass would not be on board for NATO lying to the rest of the world and leaving the rest of the survivors in there to rot. And if Jim is unable to get the necessary proof he needs to expose NATO from outside the quarantine, could we potentially see him descend back into the quarantine in order to get the proof firsthand? I suppose there is also the possibility that he has been inside the quarantine this entire time, and if that is the case, they're going to have to come up with a pretty good backstory to explain where he's been this entire time and why he's showing up now. But whatever happens to be the case, I certainly hope he doesn't just show up out of the blue with little to no explanation as to where he's been. At that point, it would feel more like fan service than story-driven. But whatever role Jim goes on to play in the second film, one thing we do know for sure is that Spike is going to be a major part of the second film as well, as this is his trilogy after all. In the first film, we saw the beginning of Spike's hero's journey in his coming-of-age tale. And if they are continuing to follow the three-act structure of the hero's journey as they did in the first film, then the second film would begin the second act, called The Initiation. During the initiation phase, our hero will face various different challenges and trials along the way, and will encounter allies who will help them on their path, but will also encounter enemies who will oppose them, which could be where Jim and the Jimmies come into play, with one being the enemy and the other being the ally. We do know that Jack O'Connell's Jimmy character is said to be one of the main villains of the trilogy, which could make Jim from 28 Days Later the ally that Spike meets along the way that ends up helping him, along with characters like Dr. Kelson and maybe even his father Jamie as well, which could be a good enough reason to keep both of their characters present in the story, as I have to imagine Jamie is undoubtedly going to come after Spike at the beginning of the second film. And even the Alpha, Samson himself, has a pretty good setup for the second film as well. With Spike bringing the Alpha's child to Holy Island at the end of the first film, we could see Samson continue his rampage in trying to get her back, leading to a clash between him and the community. And for our young protagonist Spike, if they are continuing on the path of the hero's journey, then he will face his biggest challenge in this second film, a step that is called the approach to the inmost cave, which usually ends up leading to the next step in the hero's journey, the ordeal, where our main protagonist faces a major crisis, often a life-or-death situation, which could potentially be Spike facing the Jimmies in a final confrontation. And should Spike end up prevailing, he would then face the final step of the second act, commonly referred to as the seizing of the sword, where after confronting the final ordeal and prevailing, our young protagonist receives a reward of sorts, usually in the form of knowledge or treasure. And in Spike's case, I get the feeling his reward will most likely be knowledge. In this case, knowledge of what is really happening inside the quarantine zone and what information NATO is really suppressing from the rest of the world, which could perfectly set up the third and final act in the last film in the trilogy, with Spike's final mission being exposing NATO to the rest of the world and letting everybody know what's really happening to the survivors inside the quarantine zone, with help of whatever remaining allies he has left. After all, one thing Alex Garland and Danny Boyle have stated is that this trilogy is going to be telling a story on a much wider scale, which definitely leads me to believe that the trilogy is going to be building towards something massive, and exposing the nefarious cover-up that NATO has been enacting over the last 28 years would certainly be massive enough. But who knows, it is more of a tinfoil hat theory more than anything. But one thing we know for sure is that the second film will be kicking off at some point in early 2026, as it is currently slated for January 16th. And we know that not only will the Jimmies be a massive part of the second film, but Cillian Murphy's Jim himself will also be returning as well. And something tells me these two Jims are headed for a violent clash. But definitely leave your thoughts and theories down below. How would you like to see them bring Cillian Murphy's Jim back into the story? And what role do you think the Jimmies will play in the upcoming film? And while I am a little bit hesitant as to how good the second film is going to be, considering where the first one ended, and considering the fact that Danny Boyle will not be directing it, but I am hoping that Alex Garland's writing is strong enough to carry it through to the third film, where Danny Boyle will most likely be returning to direct. But that is going to do it for our preview and predictions for the upcoming second installment in the 28 Years Later trilogy. I want to give a big thank you to everybody out there for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like on your way out and consider subscribing to stay up to date on all of our upcoming content. And as always, keep those tinfoil hats on, folks, and I will see you on the next one.
There's no discharge in the war.